Now for something completely different. I'm going to be talking about one of APAC's best kept secrets. And you all come to KuppingerCole events to hear about this sort of stuff. So I'm very pleased to be here. Actually, can I just say one thing? I'm very pleased that we've got this event happening now. This is the first KuppingerCole activity in Asia event in APAC. And I'm very pleased to, thanks so much, very pleased to be part of that. It's great to have you all here. In terms of KuppingerCole, I guess everybody knows about KuppingerCole, but I just want to emphasize that there are three legs to the stool, not just events. Okay? There's a large research repository you need to look at, and there's also analyst services if you'd like to take advantage of that. Okay? Now, I'd like to start with a agenda. We're going to talk about privacy. We're going to go into cross-border privacy rules, and then some next steps of what you can do about that. But I'd like to start with, this is a Martin Kuppinger slide that basically says, whatever we're talking about here, let's keep in mind that we're talking about people. Okay, so when it comes to privacy, we're talking about the people that are a part of your organization. And these people could be employees, could be contractors, could be partners, could be your customers, but they're all people. And they all want to work with devices. And they need to connect to you with devices, and you've got to support a lot of devices. And I know you know all of this stuff. Increasingly, it's things. And you're going to need to make sure that you accommodate what people want to do with things. That is, protect their access to those things that turn things on and off. And it's protecting access to the data that these sensors are collecting. Okay, but keep in mind that the center of all of this is things. When it comes to consumer IAM, by the way, KuppingerCole does take a little bit of a different approach than do some of the other analyst organizations. We don't see that hard and fast division between CIAM and the identity and data management that you're doing within your organization. Okay? Granted, they're probably going to be instantiated with different products, but in terms of thinking through what you need to do about identifying people, regardless of whether they're a staff member in your company or a customer that's buying things from you, they are people. And try and think through, at least from a strategic point of view, the fact that we're dealing with people that have identities, we're dealing with people that have different roles with us and dealing with us, and we need to accommodate all of that. So suffice for the introduction. What now are we needing? What do we need to grapple with when it comes to privacy? Well, there's the citizen concerns, and then or customer concerns, and then there's the company concerns. Okay? And what CBPR does, the cross-border privacy rules in APAC, is try and balance those two together. So rather than GDPR, which is very much coming from the point of view of what do I as an individual want to do to protect my privacy, what CBPR does says, well, that's fine, but what do we need to do in terms of the companies that want to actually do some business here? And we try and make a balance between them. So the citizens, obviously, there's concerns about where our information is being kept. And as has been made several times here, US, Australia, we don't want to give the government any more than we have to. And we would prefer that the information we give to the tax department is kept very separate from the information that we give to the health department, which is kept very separate from the information that we give to immigration. So we like to keep that separate, and we like to manage that. Okay, we want to make sure that our information is being kept private, obviously, and treated properly, and that's a big concern when it comes to AI. I think actually men have more of a concern than women. I don't know. This is just could be from my very small sphere. But I see my wife. She doesn't mind giving information to Woolworths. She's got an everyday rewards card with Woolworths that says all of this information I've got on you allows us to provide you better services. So Woolworths know that we like our coffee. so that my wife will often get an email saying, coffee's on special at Woolworths, and here's a coupon for you to get it cheaper, because they know when she turns up to buy coffee, that's not all that she's going to. So she's quite happy doing all of that. I think men are a little bit more cautious in that we say, there's a lot of information that these companies are collecting on us, and is it all being used properly? When it comes to the company concerns, the issues there are, how does Woolworths make sure that they don't treat our information badly? How do they make sure that they keep, in my situation, the Australian government happy? Because Australia does have some pretty stringent privacy regulation that was brought in 2014. And so organizations that transgress that privacy are open for problems. But now what about then the company that must deal now across borders? And in APAC we've got that problem, haven't we? There are many companies in Singapore that sell outside of Singapore. They're selling into the Philippines, into Indonesia, into Thailand, into Australia. How does that poor company know what's happening in the regulation sphere within these other jurisdictions? Well, quite frankly, they don't. They're relying on the fact that there's nothing really in place for a customer in Thailand to come and say, you transgress my privacy. They're relying on the fact that that is unlikely to happen. But as we shall see, that's changing. So we've got now this cross-border privacy rules, and I'm going to come to tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But I wanted to compare it with GDPR. I must admit, I'm a bit of a voice in the wilderness when it comes to KuppingerCole, because GDPR looms so large within the organization. But I say, Martin, don't forget CBPR. And in fact, the first advisory note on this topic is about to come out, and there's an early version of it there if you'd like to pick it up on your way out. GDPR, as everybody knows, relies upon a very tight coupling between the member states in Europe. Okay? The member states in Europe have come together and said, this is how we're going to, across the whole jurisdiction, this is how we're going to manage privacy. Well, fat chance of doing that in APAC. Okay? We have to grapple with the fact we've got all of these different sovereign states that have all got different privacy regulation, and we needed a mechanism to bring that together. In terms of the GDPR, as we've heard, it's pretty stringent, right? There's strong punitive elements behind GDPR that makes companies want to comply. We don't have that with CBPR. We are relying more on the negotiation and relationships between the enforcement agencies within countries. So that's just a sort of a comparison between the two, because that was required by the title of this presentation. Okay, so what's the objective here? Cross-border privacy rules basically say what we want to do is provide more frictionless trade between countries within APAC. Okay? And we want to, but at the same time, make sure that the individual's privacy is maintained. So the trick is to say, okay, Singaporean company, you can ship your product into all of these other countries. How do we make sure that you're protected in terms of the privacy regulation? And more importantly, how do we know that how do we make sure that the people you're dealing with, your customers, have their PII protected in terms of if I've got certain rights within my own country, how do I know that when I'm dealing with this foreign company that my privacy rights are protected? History of this is it started a way long time ago. So it's through the Asia Pacific. economic consortium where under APEC it was started back in 2004, and then there was this common, or one, I shouldn't say common, it's called the Privacy Framework. The APEC Privacy Framework that came out in 2007 is an opportunity for companies to normalize their privacy details against a common set of privacy regulations. So the privacy within the APEC countries now, within the framework, this privacy framework that's been put up, there are 9 principles that go through, and they're in the report if you want to have a look at that. The 9 principles are behind privacy. And so if a country now wants to join the CBPR, they take their privacy principles and map them against the privacy principles that are in the framework and determine how they're going to deal with any nuances there. So for instance, in Australia, we've got 13 privacy principles. So the Australian government is mapping those 13 against the 9 within the framework and determining how they're going to deal with anomalies. Okay? So that's up to the country to do that. There's 4 already that have signed up and are part of it, and we've got seven committed. So what we can see is there's a critical mass. I would say by the end of 2018 we'll have a critical mass here that from that point on it's going to be something that people are going to really be wanting to see. In terms of those are the 9, by the way. And so you can see how they're covering basic issues when it comes to principles, and you need to make sure that your activity within your country can be mapped to that. So for instance, the PII data collection, it's generally accepted now in virtually all countries that have privacy legislation, and that's actually a prerequisite. There are some countries in APAC that don't have privacy regulation in place yet. They can't participate in CBPR. But provided you've got that data collection, we've got to make sure, like within Australia, you cannot collect any more information than you need for a particular transaction. I've got to tell you the story. I took my wife to the theatre. This is going back a couple of years, and it doesn't happen very often. But anyway, it was quite a good experience. I went into the website and they show you the layout of the theatre, and for your particular show you can choose, that shows what's available, and you choose the seats you want, and that all worked very well. Then the next screen said, well, what's your name and address? I thought, they don't need my name and address to sell if I'm on a seat. So I put in Mickey Mouse, 123 Anywhere Street, Anywhere USA, that's what I put in. And went to the next screen, and that collected my money. It put me to the payment service, and they collected the payment for it, and that worked very well. Then the next screen, when it came back from the payment service, said, okay, we'll mail you the tickets. So quick, trying to go back to actually put in my address, and the session crashed. So I had to call them Monday morning and said, hi, this is Mickey Mouse. So they did actually send me the tickets out to Mickey Mouse, the postal box I get. But you're not allowed to collect more information than you need. And that point was made actually by Matthias when he did actually at the hotel where they wanted to see your passport. They didn't need all of the information in Matthias's passport to give him a key to the room. And we, as the people that understand this sort of stuff, we've got to be much better at saying you can't do that. So mustn't collect any more information than you absolutely have to have. You've got to give the individual the ability, and this is now where consent comes in. You've got to allow them to say yes, they are agreeing to this particular transaction that they're going to go through. You need to make sure that that information is protected. It's not satisfactory to have a situation where you're information gets stolen. As soon as you've done that, the company has not complied with privacy laws, and they could be penalised for that. So you can map all of your particular principles in your own country to these 9 and see where they fit. And the trick is for the enforcement agencies to determine how that's going to happen. Okay, so what must happen within a particular country is the country regulator, and that will be in Singapore. It's the data. What's the government department called in Singapore that does the data protection? That's the one. Okay, they're the enforcement agency for Singapore, or will be. Singapore gave their intent in September. So by next year they'll be part of CBPR, and so they'll be responsible for the enforcement within Singapore. In Australia, it's the Australian Office of the Information Commissioner. They'll be the body that does the enforcement there. And then within each country there needs to be at least one accountability agent. And an accountability agent is the person or the entity that's responsible for certifying companies to the mechanism. So there's a certification that goes to allow the companies to say, look, you come in and you audit my business processes that collect or use PII, and you make sure that it complies to the security regulation in our country. Okay? And once they've done that, they get to say they're CBPR certified. And then any citizen within a CBPR country can deal with that company and can know that should there be any problem, they can go to the enforcement agency in their country, and that enforcement agency will take up that issue and will investigate and will take action if action is needed. Okay? So that's in the moment I was mentioning Singapore setting that up. Australia, they agreed at the APEC meeting in Vietnam in November last month. Australia's agreed to sign up to. So they're going through that activity now. And there is publicly available how the enforcement happens, how the audit happens is publicised, and how the enforcement happens is all publicised too. So it's you can get all of the information on the program. There's a lot of it's transparent. So right now, North America is well represented in APAC, in CBPR, as well as Japan. Japan is fully signed up in CBPR. In terms of where we're going, those ones that are shown there have all indicated that they are going to be signing up to CBPR. Okay, so what are the next steps? If you're a multinational company, or if you're advising a multinational company, do encourage them to do that audit. Now, this is, as I mentioned earlier today, there has been some pushback with companies saying, well, why should I put all of this money into an audit? Well, there's 2 reasons. One is that it's going to, number one, make sure that you go and improve your processes, because you're not going to go and get audited until you've done it yourself, internal audit, and fixed up the processes, and done all of the things that GDPR wants, which is make sure that you've got somebody that's looking after PII data in your company. If you don't have a data controller in your company in Europe, you're silly. Because if your enforcement agency comes to you and says, who's your data controller? And you say, no, that's not a good look. So, as we move into CBPR, it's going to require companies to be much better at saying, okay, we are a company that looks after people's privacy, so employees, make sure you do that properly, and by the way, we've got somebody that's looking after our PII. It's going to raise what's it they say, the tide, a rising tide lifts all boats. That's what we're going to be doing by following CBPR with our company. So do encourage your company to do that. They've got to map PII against the framework, and they've got to make sure that there's an accountability agent that you can go to get certified. And indeed, you might know some organizations that might want to put up their hand to provide that service. If you're working in a country that doesn't have that, I think multinational companies tend to have some clout, and they need to go to their organization and say, their country regulators and say, look, CBPR would allow me in the longer term to reduce friction within trade. It will relieve me of having to worry about privacy regulation in the countries with which we're dealing. And it also gives you, I think, a promotional benefit. If you've got that CBPR certified mark, I think citizens are probably going to feel a little bit more comfortable entering their personal information into your website when they're doing business with you. So that could be this promotional capability. Okay, so what do we think? Do we think that this is a good idea or not?
Good idea.
We have one good idea.
Fact of life.
Excellent.
I'll say good idea, but there's an issue that every time there's a new regulation like this, it makes life much more complex for us. So we talk about how even companies in Asia implement GDPR, and now for Singapore they're going to do PDPA, and now they're going to do this as well.
Well, no,
How can they practically actually do that?
Okay, well, thanks, John. In actual fact, there's no new regulation here.
So that makes it easy. What is it? What does that mean?
Well, the privacy regulation already exists. The problem is, as a company dealing transnationally, I either have to understand the regulation in every country that I'm dealing with, or I just sign up to CBPR.
So it's the lowest
It's a normalization. I don't like the term lowest common denominator. It's a normalization of privacy within that.
So what's the chance that the GDPR is going to sign up for that?
There has been some talk of that, and I'm told that there has been some discussion with the APEC bodies as far as is there something we can do with GDPR. So I've no idea how far along that is. I do, based on the slide on the differences, I do perceive that, they're very different animals, and how they can be brought together, I'm not sure. I do think, though, that one of the factors that has accelerated the interest in CBPR is the US issue with Safe Harbor and the problem they had with that. Countries are not happy with just letting it happen anymore, and they want some framework through which they can do this properly, and the US is part of CBPR now. We had another question.
No, you had a wonderful slide with differences, right?
Yes.
Why is it so complicated? Is it like a governmental issue to find one kind of ground to say this is a regulation we do all here? Or is it just that the big conglomerates have no interest in that?
Oh, then absolutely. Okay, coming back to the first bit, your first point though, it all comes back to people. We're dealing with humans. And when it comes to the CBPR, it does rely on one human being talking to another human being and say, does it make sense what happened here? Has there been an infraction here? Do we agree there has been? Well, then let's do something about it. Whereas with GDPR, it's they're dead, as they did. Yeah? So there's a bit of a different nuance there between the two. So,
You said there are different animals, and I agree. Nevertheless, many companies try to, or have to, comply to both CBPR and GDPR for different reasons, and they follow a assess once, comply many approach. Is there an overlap when it comes to controls? How big is that overlap?
It's an interesting question, yeah. In terms of if there is agreement between CBPR and GDPR, what at least that would mean is there's a common body that will actually investigate things, right? I mean, so GDPR, for instance, relies on the Australian Identity Commissioner's Office picking up the phone when somebody from an enforcement agency in Europe calls. I'm sure they will, and they'll get involved. CBPR formula makes that, there's a process that they must follow in order to do that. And if GDPR taps into that, there's a potential for CBPR being used for GDPR enforcement.
I would argue for that, because the things that you are pointing where the differences are largely implementation kinds of things, and the basic principles that you listed up on the screen are identical. As GDPR and APEC are identical, it's only the underlying implementation of how the enforcement and things are going to happen. And so having a global agreement that this is the way that we want people to get to seems like absolutely the right way to go.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.